Good evening, everybody. My name's Mick Napier, and I want to welcome you to this event in the series of programs organised by the Palestine Return Centre for their Week of Return. My name's Mick Napier from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I'm delighted to be a guest chair with four excellent guests tonight to discuss Stop the JNF, over 120 years of colonisation, where our guests will discuss, will focus on the history of the JNF, its current crimes in Palestine, and those working in various countries to stop the JNF on the ground. So why this meeting? Well, we have some very indiscreet new ministers in Israel. Ben-Gvir is very open about his genocidal fantasies. And it reminded me last week of a scene in the new film Farah, where we see a hooded collaborator picking out Palestinians for execution during the Nakba of 1948. And it should remind many of us that the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, was very important in drawing up the files in the years before 48, which were used to carry out those mass executions and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I hope that answers the question why this meeting is timely and important. But Palestinians continue to resist. Our governments continue to be in acute complicity with those crimes, and those things taken together mean that Palestinians have a call on our solidarity. Tonight, four speakers. Asa Winstanley is a well-known journalist. Khaluda Jarma, her family lives in Ida refugee camp, and their land and property is currently under the so-called British Park, which they can visit, or they could visit in a very few minutes if walls and barbed wire didn't stop them. Annie O'Gara is an active member of Stop the JNF UK, who has been working with Khulud over a period of time. And our final speaker tonight, after which we'll move to Q&A, is Heidi Greenbaum from South Africa. So without more ado, I'll introduce Asa Winstanley. He's originally from South Wales, I learn. He was in Palestine from 2004 till 2007 with the International Solidarity Movement. He's returned there many times since then. He was editor of the late Palestine Times, an English language daily newspaper in the occupied West Bank. He has been writing for the highly esteemed Electronic Intifada since 2009, and he has been an associate editor since 2012. Asa, why do you want to share your views about the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, with our audience? Please go ahead.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Mick. Appreciate it. Is my sound all okay?
Very good indeed.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, it's great to be on this panel. I'm going to focus on the history of the JNF, and I will leave to the others what the Stop the JNF campaign is up to in more recent times, although I will touch on it. So if we understand what the Jewish National Fund is, first of all, so the JNF was founded in 1901. So as the title of today's session is 120 years of colonization, that is no exaggeration. That's what has been going on. That's what's been happening. So since 1901, the JNF has posed in the West as a charitable organization. So in modern times, this has kind of been updated to portraying itself as having an environmental role. This is, something that's often called greenwashing. And you see here on this slide, which you can hopefully all see, this is a flyer of the JNF UK that the JNF UK distributed in 2012 that I collected myself online back in 2012. I wrote about it in an article back then. And as you can see, it says they promoted it as JNF Green Sunday. So the image they're trying to portray is an empty desert. What they're saying, the message they're trying to put across is that Palestine is was an empty desert until we came along, until Israel came along. So this is the myth of the JNF, as the Zionist slogan goes: "A land without a people for a people without a land." This is the myth. So, I mean, as we all know, that's completely untrue. That Palestine was, and is inhabited, so, you know, if we could have the next slide. Am I controlling that myself? Yeah, okay, I am. So Israel lobby propagandists like David Collier here, they deny that Israel is a colonial movement. So in the post-colonial era, it's even become fashionable to claim that Israel is a movement for self-determination, for Jewish self-determination. So you see here David Collier, who's he's a tweeter and blogger who basically defends Israel in all ways that he can, and he's closely associated with the Israeli government. And you can see from this recent tweet, he says, Zionism is not settler colonialism, and we're not invaders or white Europeans. But the JNF, Zionism's founders, including Theodor Herzl, they had no such qualms, and they explicitly described Zionism as a colonial movement. And in the next slide, we can see an example of that, of JNF literature. I got this online. It was given to me by an activist, Andy Simons, who a PSC activist, and he's a retired librarian by trade, and he's always coming up with these amazing historical gems. And this is a JNF leaflet from 1944 from the US, and you can see they're calling it Nakloth, Massachusetts, a colony in Palestine. So they were back then, 1944, before Israel was founded. They were promoting the idea that we're going to start a Jewish colony in Palestine. You know, this was explicitly the rhetoric, because, of course, you know, this was before the era of decolonization. This was before, you know, the dismantling of the British Empire, and so they are putting it forward as a positive idea. So with the Nakba of 1948, was the ethnic cleansing of 800,000 Palestinians by Zionist militias, the state of Israel was established. Hundreds of Palestinian villages were destroyed to ensure that the refugees could not return. The JNF purchased the stolen Palestinian land from the state, and since then it's played a key role in an exclusionary land regime that discriminates against Palestinians. And that's Palestinians all over Palestine and all over the world. So after 1948, much of the land in what was then renamed as Israel was handed over to the JNF, and it has maintained a quasi-governmental role. In 1948, the JNF became one of the 4 key national institutions of Israel, which are still today operated out of National Institutions House in Jerusalem. The academic David Miller has done some really fantastic research on this. You can look that up if you look up National Institutions of Israel. Go to Powerbase website, all the details of it are there. Some really fascinating history and resources there. The other 3 national institutions are the World Zionist Organization, the United Israel Appeal, and the Jewish Agency. So these are all the foundational settler colonial institutions of the state of Israel, which are, you know, they describe themselves as non-governmental, but actually they have this intimate connection to the state. So what the JNF does today is around the world, it uses charitable front groups in the West and around the world to raise money, including in the UK. So in this way, they benefit from tax exemptions. So this is from the Charity Commission's website. I looked at it today, and it shows that the JNF's UK charity, so it is a charity, it's exempt from a lot of taxes. It shows a total income for the financial year ending 31st of December 2021 of more than £14 million. And so what is the JNF actually doing with these funds then? So it uses these funds to build colonial Israeli settlements in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and even in 1948 occupied Palestine. So that's the present day Israel, you know, the so-called, within the so-called Green Line. And all of these settlements are built on land that has been stolen from Palestinians right up to the present day, and which still continues to be stolen from Palestinians. So if we take, for example, the Amnesty International's report from earlier this year. So, I mean, Israel is an apartheid state, and you know that's something that Palestinians have recognized since Israel's founded, essentially. But you know, it used to be that this was a fairly controversial thing to say in the West. But I mean, that's no longer really the case, because all of the mainstream human rights groups now say that Israel is an apartheid state, now agree that Israel is an apartheid state. And Amnesty International issued a report in February of this year where they described Israel as an apartheid state. And their report in February highlighted the Nakab region. So the region in the south of present-day Israel, historic Palestine, known in Hebrew as the Negev Desert. And Amnesty highlighted that region as, quote, a prime example of Israel's long-standing policy to appropriate Palestinian land and resources to benefit Jewish settlers. So a quote from Amnesty's report on that states that, quote, since its establishment in 1948, Israel has pursued an explicit policy of establishing and maintaining a Jewish demographic hegemony and maximizing its control over land to benefit Jewish Israelis while minimizing the number of Palestinians and restricting their rights and obstructing their ability to challenge this dispensation, end of quote. So in the Nakab region, the Nakab Desert, okay, the Negev Desert, there are 35 Palestinian Bedouin villages, which are designated as unrecognized by Israel, meaning that Israel won't connect them to water, electricity, other utilities, or build schools for them. And it's trying to get rid of them, essentially. What that means is that, so for example, in 2013, the Knesset approved what it was called the Power Plan, which was designed to forcibly displace residents of dozens of Palestinian villages in the Nakab Desert and concentrate them in a segregated area. So now remember, these Palestinians are nominally citizens of Israel. You know, Israel claims to be, you know, a democratic state, and you know, it claims to be the only democracy in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. But in reality, these Palestinian citizens of Israel do not have equal rights, because this land that is held by the JNF is explicitly designated to be only for Jews, and they are not Jewish, and so therefore they don't have the right to this land under Israel's apartheid regime. So it's an example of how it's not only in the West Bank that and Jerusalem that this kind of colonialism still continues today, but even within so-called Israel proper. So under the Power Plan, under the law that was passed, Israel would have forcibly displaced 700,000 Palestinian Bedouins from their area, the Nakab, 70,000 Bedouins from the area. The 35 unrecognized villages would also be demolished. But for now, that protests and the condemnations of international bodies have forced Israel to suspend implementation of the plan. But these projects are designed to drive Palestinians out of the region and replace them with Jewish Israelis. And this is what the JNFs talk about, promoting development in the Negev. That's what is the reality of it. So we see, for example, in December last year, Israeli occupation authorities demolished one of the Bedouin villages in the Nakab, the Al-Arakib, which is in the north of the Nakab. And they demolished it in December last year for nearly the 200th time since in the last 22 years. And we see here in this photo, this is from an Alternative Information Center article from a decade ago, but this shows, this is how long the demolitions of this, this village gets demolished, and the Palestinians, they just rebuild it again, time and time again. This is the resistance that they've been carrying out for so long. And what's significant about this particular photo is it shows one of the demolition vehicles that was used in the demolition of this village back in 2011, one of the many demolitions of this village, the same village, back in 2011. And you can just about make out from the photo that there's, as well as the Israeli flag on it, it's got a flag of the JNF. It says KKL JNF, so it's the Hebrew and the English name together of the JNF. So this is the reality of what the JNF is raising money for, these so-called charity. So according to Human Rights Watch, Israel demolished more than 10,000 homes in the Nakab between 2013 and 2019. So, this is the reality of what the JNF is up to, and this is the reality of why it's important to stop the JNF. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let others talk about the important work of the Stop the JNF campaign. If you want to see more of my work, you can go to asawinstanley.substack.com, and I've got a book coming out next year as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Asa. That was perfect timing. You didn't even need a reprimand. Thank you, Asa Winstanley. That was an excellent introduction. Our next speaker is Khulud Ajarma. Khulud is currently lecturing at Edinburgh University. She's a Palestinian refugee, filmmaker, award-winning photographer and filmmaker, and she has also worked in the fields of refugee studies, appropriate for a member of a refugee people, and international migration, and much more. Khulud, I've probably walked over your house. I've been to the British Park a few times, so has Annie recently. We may have walked over your property, the ruins of the house where your family lived and loved and used to make a living. How do you feel about the sign on the entrance that says this land was gifted by the JNF UK to the so-called people of Israel? Can you take it away and share your thoughts, Khulud, as a member of a family that's a direct victim of the JNF UK?
Thank you, Mick, and thank you for the Palestine Return Center for hosting us. I saw the sign myself when I managed to go to Ajur a few years ago. I was born in Aida refugee camp, as you had mentioned, and my family had been living in the camp since its establishment. And to me, the village was a place that we heard about growing up from my grandmother, who grew up in Ajur and who was forced to leave the village in 1948 together with 4 children. So when I finally managed to go to the village in a lengthy process, I was shocked to see all these signs. One of the signs said a gift from the people of the United Kingdom. And I have friends in the United Kingdom, so I thought this doesn't sound right. And when I went home and I looked up the JNF UK website, I found out that the JNF UK is a registered charity in the United Kingdom, which means that it's not only, it means that it's not only considered a reasonable, charitable body, but also that it takes or can fundraise in this country. It can get gift aid as a charity, and also that the money that is being sent from the JNF UK is part of the ongoing ethnic cleansing and the ongoing colonization of my village and 6 other villages that are located under the park. The JNF UK is part of that colonization, and not only because of these signs, but also because over the years, it had systematically made sure that the rightful owners of the land cannot return. First, by actually buying the land from the newly established Jewish state in 1948, and later by going back and demolishing all the houses that once existed, or most of the houses that once existed in the village. Those who look closely can see ruins of houses and can recognize that there was once upon a time people who lived there. But most of the houses have been destroyed. And instead of those houses, trees were planted. These trees are often claimed to be part of this greening mission of the JNF, as it calls itself as an environmental organization, which is also part of its greenwashing. And these trees are not native to the environment, so they use a lot of water from the underground. And they're very different from the indigenous trees that once were planted by the people of the villages. There are trees that existed since the time of the Palestinians lived there. So I could see, for example, fig trees that my grandmother used to talk about, cactus trees, or cactus bushes, which pre-1948 people used as borders to show their lands and their houses. And I could see also oak trees, which also my grandmother would talk about. And under one of the very ancient oak trees in the village, there was a sign saying that this tree was saved and maintained thanks to, and it names a person. The first name is John, I think. I can't remember the second name, a person from London. And it was very shocking to me that this tree that my grandmother played under as a child and that her great-grandfather had planted in the village is now being saved by somebody from London, whilst the indigenous people who lived there are very much aware of how to save their trees and how to look after them, because at the end of the day, they were farmers, they lived off the land, and they had this very, very close relationship to the land that was almost sacred, because they considered the land part of their, not only their survival and their life, but also part of their dignity. And to lose that land is therefore very, very troubling for those people. My grandparents never sold their land. They never gave it up. The only thing they took when they had to or were forced to leave the village were the documents that proved their ownership to those lands. They still have those documents. And these were the documents that we used in the case against the Charity Commission, and we sent to the Charity Commission in the UK to say, please deregister the JNF as a charity, because what they're doing is actually ethnic cleansing. A third example of these signs that exist on the land of Ajur today is a memorial grove, which is a site at one of the entrances of the village, or what used to be the entrance of the village back in 1948. And it has these very long stone pillars, on which there are names of people who are claimed to have donated to the JNF UK. So there are names of people from Glasgow, people from London, from Manchester, from Liverpool, and the list goes on and on. And to me, that also was devastating, not only because these were people who have proudly, maybe knowingly or unknowingly, gave money to continue the ethnic cleansing of my land, but also because my grandparents, who have lived on that land and who have owned that land, died away from that land, and they're buried now near Aida refugee camp, while the names and the legacy of other people who are from the UK is being marked on the land of the village. So because of that, I think it's really what has happened to the lands under the British Park is one example of the greater injustice that Palestinians have gone through. And as refugees living in Aida refugee camp, for my family, we never gave up the right of return. My grandmother, who passed away 2 years ago, till her last day, she would say, if I ever die, I want to die in Ajur. If I ever die before we return, make sure the day when you return to dig my bones out and take them back and bury them under the oak tree in Ajur. So for me, it is really the mission of my life and the lives of many other refugees to make sure that we return and we actually fulfill that wish of the generation who witnessed these atrocities and the ongoing Nakba that we are still living today because of the denial of our justified rights, including the right of return. I hope that answers the question, Mick.
No, it answers it answers it in spades, Khulud. Khulud, some people claim to support Palestine, but say the right of return is a step too far. Just concentrate on the West Bank and Gaza. What do you say to them?
Well, I think it's not up to them to decide. I think it is up to every Palestinian who had either witnessed what happened in 1948 or their descendants, because the right of return is justified right. It was passed by the United Nations in 1948 with Resolution 194, which states that the Palestinian refugees have the right to return to the places that they have left. And it's not up to an individual to tell the Palestinians to choose what to choose, not even the Palestinian leadership, because it is up to every single Palestinian refugee to decide whether they want to return or whether they want to stay where they are now. And either way, it is not only their choice, but also their right. And it's not something that is ambitious, let's say, hope. It is something that is justified and that is actually practical. Research has been done on mapping the villages that were ethnically cleansed in 1948. And research has stated that almost 90% of the villages that were ethnically cleansed in 1948 are still empty. So when people say that the return of the Palestinian...
Can you dwell on that? Because a lot of people hear the nonsense that Palestinians can't go back because there's no room. Let bygones be bygones. The Israeli Zionist Jews have taken over and it's very crowded. It's a very small piece. There's no room for Palestinians to go back. It's really important that you give the lie to that. Can you develop that a little bit further, Khulud?
Well, I'll give you two examples. One example is a project that I was involved in several years ago now, called Dreams of Home, in which we took children from Aida refugee camp to 10 villages that they originally come from, in the area south of Jerusalem, south of Hebron. And out of 10 villages that we went to, 8 were completely empty. Many of them, I think 6, were turned to what is now JNF parks. So recreational parks and hiking trails and so on. And 2 were turned into settlements. So the claim that when Palestinians cannot return, let's say those people from these 10 villages, it is actually 8 of the 10 were empty. And the second example is Ajur itself. So Canada, the British park is on top of 7 Palestinian destroyed villages. Apart from 2 very minor small kibbutz that exist on 2 of the villages, all the land that existed pre-1948 is still empty. So there are a few houses here and there that were spared, let's say, in the destruction that happened after 1948. But most of the land, and you've been to Ajur, and you've been to Ajur, it's still empty. It's completely empty. So, and as I said, the Palestine Land Society has also done research on this. Dr. Salman Abu Sitta has written on this. Actually, the vast majority of the destroyed 400 plus villages that were destroyed in 1948 are still empty. So there is space in Palestine. And once upon a time in 1948, there was space for migrants if they have come in peace, but they didn't. So, and that's why I believe that the right of return is not only possible, but practical and actually can be done if there is a will to do it.
Thank you, Khalid. This discussion will be recorded, is being recorded, of course, and will be made available afterwards for people to use and share and discuss. Annie O'Gara is our third speaker. Annie's active in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and in Stop the JNF UK, where she plays a very key role. She's also a founder of Northern Women for Palestine, a collective of activists in cities across the north. Annie calls it the north. It's actually viewed from Scotland. It's the south, but never mind. These people have got a very low parochial view. Cities across the north, which works with and amplifies voices of Palestinian women. Annie, you're sitting beside Khalid now. It's appropriate because you've been working with Khalid for quite some time now to build a bridge, to build a team of victims of the JNF and people in Britain who want to expose the crimes of the JNF and take practical action against them. Can you take that away, Annie, and explain to people further?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mick. Thanks, Asa. Thanks, Khalid, and of course, Palestine Return Centre for making this possible. I think I'll pick up that theme of exposing the JNF first, because that's one of the key purposes of the Stop the JNF campaign. And it was Gideon Levy, actually, who wrote one of his brilliantly coruscating articles not long ago, in which he said, we must get to know the JNF. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think not enough people, certainly in Britain, know enough about the JNF. So this is one of our key missions, because getting to know the JNF means getting to understand Zionism, because the JNF is at the beating heart of the Zionist project. And that project works in 2 main arenas: land, the land of Palestine, which it wants to take over in a settler colonial project, exploiting the land, the natural resources, and not so much exploiting the people as expelling and replacing them, using what Patrick Wolf calls the logic of elimination, which is at the heart of the Zionist project and which distinguishes Zionist settler colonialism from other forms of colonialism. So that's one arena in which it works, getting as much Palestinian land as possible with as few Palestinians on it as possible. And the other arena is the global one. It's about creating a cloak of invisibility, a glossy veneer for the Zionist project. And in both of those arenas, the JNF is extremely active. And that's why we must get to know it and challenge it. Asa gave us a very good overview of the history of the JNF, and Mick mentioned its role before the Nakba in developing the village files. And I would just add to that, that in addition to developing this tool that the Jewish militias used during the Nakba, the JNF also helped to push Zionist thinking forward, because Yosef Weitz, one of the leaders of the JNF, was absolutely central to Ben-Gurion's inner circle. He formed a committee called the Transfer Committee, and when he got impatient with the purchasing of land, he actually said, there is no other way than to transfer the Arabs, as he called them. Not one village must be left. And for this purpose, funds will be found. And the JNF is one of the big fundraisers for this project. And then, as Asa rightly said, the JNF came to Israel's help when Resolution 194 came out by taking the land of 300 Palestinian villages off the hands of the state and putting it into their use. And in fact, 300 villages, a lot of those were then submerged in these parks and forests, like Halud's village. And this project had two purposes. One is to prevent the right of return, and the other is to create a phony environmentalism, which the JNF has been very effective at propagating up to now. But there's some thinness in that cloak at the moment, because some of its environmental projects are beginning to look as if they are actually the very opposite. For example, the Yatir forest, which is now thought to add to climate warming rather than diminish it. Asa's mentioned the JNF today at work in the Nakab, and it's quite shocking if you look at what's actually happening in the Nakab. They want to put an ambassador's forest over the top of Al Araqib, and they're also involved in various other activities in the Nakab, which will enable Israel to move Jewish settlers, Jewish citizens in there, replacing the Bedouin citizens. And I think it's important for us to remember that all those people who are being uprooted from the Nakab are full citizens of the State of Israel, and they're going to be put into squalid townships, really squalid townships, with the highest level of poverty in the state. So the JNF UK has stated on its website that the Negev, as it calls it, the Nakab, as its name is the area of their top priority of work. And they actually say that working there will not involve matters of controversy. So clearly it does. They're at work in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, as Asa has said. And Dov Devaney, who is now the leader of the main KKL JNF based in Jerusalem, has actually said that the JNF will now begin to buy land across the Green Line in the West Bank in its own name. Now, I've just scratched the surface of what I think are some of the terrible things that the JNF has done. But really, our task in Stop the JNF is to put these up front, particularly in Britain, because of the historic centrality of Britain, the British state, to the development of Zionism from Balfour all the way through to today, when it's defending Israel and allying with Israel. So that's one of our purposes, but we also want to promote the right of return. Halud is sitting next to me. That right of return is legal, it's feasible, and it's absolutely central to the demands of the BDS movement and to the demands of every Palestinian you meet. I met children in Ida camp, tiny children who live in Ida, but they say that their home is in another village. I think we might have frozen, but I shall carry on. So the right of return is something that we are seeking to promote, obviously. And another big role that we're trying to do is to build solidarity with the Palestinians. We have formed very productive links with individual people in Palestine. We've formed productive links with the Badil organization, with Zohrot, and through the work, what we're trying to do is link up with the people whose land has been taken and develop that strong link with them. One of the ways that we're trying to do that at the moment is through the Plant a Tree campaign. There are lots of Plant a Tree campaigns in Palestine, and I think they're all of them valuable. I think the one that we're proposing links up with Stop the Wall, the grassroots activists, and particularly tries to connect with Palestinian farmers whose land is in danger of confiscation if it's not being cultivated. So that Plant a Tree project is something that we would encourage people to take up. And maybe as we approach a festive season, people should think about giving a tree or more than one tree as a gift to family, friends, and relatives. And you'll find links on the website where you can do that. I'll mention two other things before I finish, Mick, if I've got time. One of them is that we have been incensed by a propaganda film that the JNF UK put out, in which the final slide shows a map of historic Palestine with the names of British towns and cities plastered all over it. Not an inkling even of the West Bank or Gaza. And in the sea next to it, in the Mediterranean Sea, is the legend, JNF UK is 100% Israel. And the clear collocation of British towns and cities with that legend is deeply offensive. So we've been going round and doing meetings with towns and cities who are on that map, and there isn't a single person who's seen that propaganda film and seen that map that hasn't thought that it was completely and utterly outrageous. And the final point that I'll make is we have tried with the Charity Commission twice, and Khaloud's case was a very strong case with absolutely rock solid evidence that the JNF UK is occupying her family land and the family lands of the 7 other villages under British Park. We've also taken it to the fundraising committee, the fundraising commission, which is supposed to make sure that the publicity that charities put out is accurate. Now, that complaint was spearheaded by Dr. Paul Kellerman here in Sheffield, and the complaint that went up to them was countersigned by 63 Jewish citizens of this country, some of them very eminent names indeed. And that too fell on deaf ears. So we've become convinced that the Charity Commission and the fundraising body are regulatory bodies with whom we have at the moment little chance of success. But it's a very different story at grassroots level. Hence our desire to talk to the people of Britain, ordinary people of Britain, connect them with people in Palestine through some concrete projects and take that forward. And I think, as I'm not a football fan, but I've been uplifted by the solidarity and support that the ordinary football fans have given to Palestine. And I think that is universal, not just in Britain and not just in football fans. So with that optimistic note, I'll hand back to Mick.
Thanks very much, Annie. You were frozen for a while there, but can you turn your camera on and off for the later session? But we're moving on to Heidi now, and I think we seem to have normal service. Heidi Greenbaum, you've just come to us from Cape Town, and we're very glad to welcome you. You've just emerged from a great power cut, I believe, so thanks for making a special effort. Heidi's a writer, scholar, and director at the Centre for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. But I know her as the co-producer, co-maker of the film The Village Under the Forest. My God, from 2013, it seems like yesterday. But it's a brilliant film. I commend it to everyone. If you get in touch with Stop the JNF at the end, we'll put you in touch with Heidi, or we'll put you in touch with the film with her agreement. So Heidi, the news I got last week or the week before is that the JNF in South Africa is trying to get a forest built in Palestine to honor those who fought against apartheid. I mean, for God's sake, defenders of a hyper-apartheid system masquerading as opponents of apartheid. Can you kick off with that, Heidi, and then share any other thoughts you have about what you've done from South Africa in relation to Palestine? Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mick, and thank you to the Palestinian Return Centre and to the panelists tonight. It's really wonderful to be here. So, Mick, the latest outrage has a kind of surreal dimension. The South African JNF and South African Zionist Federation have established something called Gun Siyabonga. Siyabonga is a Zulu word which means we thank you, and Gun is garden in Hebrew. So it's a garden of gratitude in Telmond, which is on the Palestinian lands of Miske. And the latest, let's say, edition of the South African JNF contributions to reshaping the Palestinian landscape through using nature to foster a settler colonial myth of the Israeli nation as a kind of timeless presence, is using the anti-apartheid struggle and using Jewish activists who were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle as a way to, in my speculation and speculation of others here, is that this is an attempt to contribute to continuing and advancing that the project in historic Palestine on the one hand, but also a tactic to drive a wedge between South African solidarity. You know, South African government's official position is one of very strong and outspoken solidarity with the Palestinian cause and struggle. And this, in a way, co-opts activists in our struggle in order to advance historical denialism through a rearrangement of the topography of historic Palestine. So, comrades from the South African Jews for Free Palestine are in the process of developing a statement on this, and we will hear more soon on that. If I can just kind of go back a little to where you started and to where Asa began his talk, and it was picked up by Khulud and by Annie, to say that, you know, when I started to work on The Village Under the Forest, the film that I made with Mark Kaplan, and that involved Mahmoud Issa, the social historian of the Palestinian village Lubia, which had about 2,700 inhabitants by the time it was attacked and depopulated in 1948. I embarked on an extensive 3 or 4 years of research on the JNF South Africa, but also the JNF as this very complex organization that has conscripted Jewish people from around the world into its project in ways that are, I think, more complex than and I agree very strongly with the last quote of Gideon Levy, that we need to understand and know and study the JNF really in order to, as Amilcar Cabral said, he was a great revolutionary and anti-colonial theorist and strategist from West Africa. You know, one has to theorize more sharply in order to act more strongly and more pointedly. So the question of research, not for its own sake, but as part of developing campaigns and tactics that can whittle away and erode the kind of discursive hegemony, the narrative hegemony, but also the organizational and moral hegemony that the JNF, the Kakal, has taken over the last 120 years of planting, according to its own count, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, some 260 million trees across Palestine. Before I say a few words about the film, I'd like to just add to what you've said, that not only did the JNF compile the village files that provided the intelligence for the pointed actions of the militia that were involved, that became the Haganah, the Israeli army that were involved in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. The JNF also formed the what were called naming committees after the war, in which the kind of creating a new toponymic and topographic map of historic Palestine could proceed. And through that, so they were implicated in the what was called the Judaization and Hebraicization of the new state. And the naming committees contributed to renaming some 9,000 Arabic place names. So, you know, the complexity, I mean, in addition to, I think the very effective tactic of tree planting have also been deeply involved in developing various kinds of infrastructures for the state and of the state, and are now involved in other state institutions, including television broadcast and others. Just to go back to the tree planting, you know, the settler colonial enterprise is not simply one of conquest and in the case of historic Palestine, the politicide and ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinians, but also the creation of a landscape that could give material kind of expression to the narratives, the new national mythical narratives of this kind of continuous presence of a national entity that would become the ethnic polity of Israel, exclusively Jewish, or at least under the nation state law, privileging the Jewish polity as an ethnic national one. So tree planting has inculcated for non-Israeli Jews a sense of a kind of almost a metonymic substitution, roots in the land, a sense of geographical proximity, a sense of affective affiliation and connection. It's been a powerful educational tool, not just the idea of greening, but the idea of having a stake, a place, playing with, with symbols of communal Jewish life and re-scripting them into a narrative of kind of custom that is modern, it's invented, and it's fictional. And that's, one of those symbols that has been played with is the kind of both mystical and cultural, but also, I guess, spiritual symbol of the tree of life. And so, this conscription of non-Israeli Jews has been part of the success in both crafting a new landscape that erases the Palestinians, but also that erases the Nakba, the destruction, the traces of destruction of Palestinian life. So it's a kind of double erasure. And that double erasure is one that needs to be kind of opened up and unpacked and held together. So held together in how we think about the work of the JNF. It both remade space and unmade place. And places like Lobia village, which is where the South Africa forest is planted, which is the focus of the film, and places like Ajur, Khulud's home, and, and some more than 500 others, both rural and urban localities. So the film tried to hold that process together, the making a new landscape to which non-Israeli Jews could affiliate and identify, and the process of the destruction, and then the covering over of the destruction, the covering over of the catastrophe of the Nakba. So why did we do this? Well, we did this in order to hold together, to kind of unpartition what has become partitioned space, partitioned narratives, but also a kind of partitioned mentality. There's been a kind of an education around a Jewish identity, around Palestinian identity, as if historically, as if 200 years ago, these weren't more fluid, weren't woven together into everyday life in historic Palestine. And that possibility, the kind of imagining of interwoven lives has been completely obliterated. And this isn't to romanticize, and I'm not talking about coexistence here. I'm just talking about thousands of years of life in Palestine that have been erased. And the JNF is, as was said by the previous speaker, the kind of beating heart of the land regime, but also of the discursive regime that creates perception, that creates understanding in deeply hegemonic and problematic ways and violent ways. So I don't want. I just want to talk before my time runs out about the follow-up to the film, and I'm going to, in the Q&A, Mick, I'm going to place the Vimeo link to the film because I fear I've been speaking in rather abstracted ways, so that people on the webinar can watch the film and see what we've tried to do with the participation of many Palestinians from Lubya. As I said, 2,700 people who lived there up until 1948, a very vibrant and active memory culture that remains. And the film but it became a kind of resource for
1 minute, Heidi.
Okay, for activists in South Africa to approach Palestinians from Lubya as well as Palestinian organizations to hold a ceremony at Lubya in the ruins of Lubya in South Africa Forest in 2015, where there'd been a kind of subversion of the JNF, the tree planting certificates, where certificates were handed back to say, we acknowledge this is your land, trees were planted on your land, we join you in joint struggle and solidarity towards return, towards restitution, and towards a non-partition future of peace, equality, and justice. In 2016, Palestinians from Lubya and activists from other organizations came to South Africa, and we planted, and at South African Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, a Nakba forest was planted. And this has been an incredibly important development for education around the Nakba and around the JNF's role in erasing the Nakba as well as in displacing Palestinians. And the Nakba forest is planted with African wild olive trees. At Constitutional Court, there are signboards that speak about the JNF, that speak about Lubya and South Africa Forest, that speak about the Nakba villages more broadly, and speak about the obligation, particularly in South Africa, to commit in solidarity and joint struggle to the return to villages and lands, restitution, and a political future of equality, dignity, and justice. So let me stop here, and thank you again.
Heidi, thank you. And that extra minute was well worth it to hear about what you've been doing outside the Constitutional Court in South Africa. That's something that we can pick up on. Friends, I've got 4 questions. I'd like you to try to answer them. You may have answered some of them already, actually, but to try to answer them in double quick time. And here are questions from viewers. Forgive me, I've got big fat thumbs. People are disbelieving. How can the JNF possibly function as a charity? Okay, that runs through everything tonight. What can we do to stop the JNF where we are? So we're where we are. What can we do? What's the role of the JNF in the NACAB? It's been touched on from ASA onwards. And would you argue the JNF exists? Final question. Would you argue the JNF exists to undermine the integral connection between Indigenous Palestinians and their land? So feel free to pick something when you come back and make concluding remarks. I'd just like to add a few remarks of my own. I think it's an extremely illuminating conversation we've had tonight. If you want to get in touch, it's easy to remember, stopthejnf.org. Stopthejnf.org. If you go there, you'll find an email address, a phone number. Get in touch if you want. I'm going to take the liberty of saying if any of these folk are available to speak, you might be able to book them. My commission will be a cup of coffee or something like that for the Speakers Bureau. but they would add something valuable to your organisation's conversations about the JNF. The news from South Africa might take your breath away, but the JNF has set up an anti-racism forest, or forests named after the King family, Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King, over the ruins of a racist massacre of the people of Ain al-Zaytun, a notorious massacre. So you commemorate, your anti-racism credentials are to conceal racist massacres. They've set up an anti-fascist themed forest called the Memoria Forest, which covers up the fact that Israel armed and trained the torturers of the Argentine junta to murder Jews and non-Jews alike. They set up a forest to honour a Christian clergyman from World War II, Reverend Bastian Jan Ader, a resistance leader who was killed as he was trying to rescue even more Jews from the Gestapo. Tortured and killed. Some of the people he saved went to Israel and built a forest in his name. When his son Eric Ader found out his father was being honoured for struggling against a racist state by building a commemoration over another crime scene, racist crime against Palestinians, he objected very, very vociferously, and the signs were taken down and so on. So the recent news from South Africa by itself might make you shocked, but the JNF could be said to be overreaching itself. Let's go back in the same order. Why not? Because we remember Asa from a very long time ago. So we'll take the speakers in the same order, if I may, and ask you to refer to those questions and make closing remarks in the light of what you've heard other people say. Asa, come on in and try and be very quick.
Yeah, the question about the JNF existing to separate Palestinians from their land. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting if you look at the JNF's propaganda in that article of mine from 2012 that I referred to. I quoted a JNF Charity Commission document from December 2010, and it said that the JNF had, quote, supported Israel since 1901, helping to build a country out of nothing. So again, the idea there is that there was nothing there, you know, that there was no people there, and that it could be people like Khulud's family didn't exist. That's what they're saying, you know. And this is a very sort of typical settler colonial ideology, because they're saying the people don't exist, but we still have to deport them. So, you know, this is what it is. I mean, the Palestinian scholar Nirma Salha wrote about this. That he talked about the Zionist, the infamous slogan, "A land without people for people without land." What he says of that is that, quote, they didn't mean that as a literal they didn't mean it as a literal demographic assessment. Quote, they did not mean that there was no people in Palestine, but there was no people worth considering within the framework of the notions of European supremacy that then held sway. So it was a kind of disappearing of the Palestinian people. And that's what they're still doing today. I mean, you look on their website now, it talks about the Zionist pioneers and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, the Palestinian people have stubbornly refused to disappear. And this is the problem that the JNF faces, I think.
That is the insuperable problem they face. They cannot digest the Palestinian people. Khulud, would you like to respond to what others have said, or final thoughts from you?
Well, I do understand people saying that they don't believe it's a charity, because I didn't believe it was registered as a charity myself when I first learned about what the JNF UK was doing. And unfortunately, it is registered as a charity in nearly 50 countries. So our struggle against the JNF UK is one of many struggles that need to be led and are being led by comrades and anti-racist, anti-colonial people all over the world now. One example that I can mention is the Stop JNF in Canada and their work to undermine what the JNF Canada is doing. And also there is, of course, a park called the Canada Park, which is built on the ruins of destroyed Palestinian villages. So what we've done here is that we're trying to talk to the Charity Commission. We wrote to the Charity Commission. We took the Charity Commission to court to put them on the right track. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. What we're doing now is more of what Annie mentioned, of raising awareness among the general public about what the JNF UK is doing, and hoping that this will lead to greater awareness and hopefully to also greater pressure on the local governments as well. Annie, you might want to add.
Yeah, I'd like to say something briefly about all 4 questions, if I may, Mick. First of all, how can it be a charity? I'll give you one sentence that the Charity Commission has written. The test of charitable status is a test of what a charity was set up to do, not what it does in practice. So that's what we're up against, that sort of view, and it does make it unbelievable, both that the Charity Commission takes this attitude and that the JNF is a charity. What you can do, okay, please go to the Stop the JNF website. You'll find a page there about the British Park campaign and about Balfour Forest. And there's a range of 2 or 3 actions that you can take there, including writing to your council and finding out why your city is on that map, signing a declaration to say that not in my name. And I think everybody who lives in Britain should be saying not in our name. And you can look at the Plant a Tree campaign, please. It's on the front page, and it's a very practical campaign. It is more than symbolic, because the trees go to farmers that are identified by Stop the Wall comrades of ours on the ground. And it's a way of resisting both the JNF from its encroachments in and around places like Bethlehem, where Khulud is, and resisting the Israeli attempts to grab yet more land. And the third thing you can do is get in touch with us. And if you're in a group, ask for a meeting with a group, and we'd be more than happy to come and talk to you and spread it further. The role in the NACAB, well, trees again, I'm afraid. They're planting trees. The ambassador's forest is what they're trying to plant over Al Araqib. The Yatir forest encroaches on the NACAB. These are alien trees in the wrong place. Look at the JNF UK's website. They're investing a lot of money in projects with the Jewish communities that are settling in the NACAB. They look benign, but what we have to remember is that some of the new villages or towns that are being created can only be lived in if you pass a test by an admissions committee. This is racial profiling. So the JNF is supporting towns, putting projects in place where an apartheid system of selection of residents is there. So the last, and they say this is not politically controversial at all. The last point, does it exist to undermine the Palestinian hold on the land? Yes, it does, but it's not just for that purpose. It's also to try to root the Jewish people into a land that is historically Palestinian. And I think the land takes its revenge. When the Jerusalem hills went on fire, they exposed the beautiful Palestinian terracing that predated the plantation there by the JNF. When I was going around Ajur, I saw the cactuses which are there from the Palestinian time. And our guide, Umar al-Gubari of Zokhrot, fantastic man, plucked some branches from sweet olive trees that were there before the Nakba. So they're trying to undermine it, trying to root, but the Palestinian land is reasserting itself, as the Palestinians always do.
Heidi. Would you like to make some concluding remarks and respond to the questions?
Just some very broad, a broad response to say that, having Palestinian elders from Lubia visiting South Africa and doing a speaking tour, and we were immensely lucky. We managed to, with representatives from Zochrot, Adala, and Adred, the Association for Internally Displaced Palestinians inside 48, we managed to do a presentation to the International Relations Portfolio Committee in Parliament, and what we learned was that, in addition to the kind of facts and figures about this, the JNF as a kind of as a colonial institution, a settler colonial institution, really for people to hear the stories and experiences and memories of place. It kind of brought to life the extent of the human destruction and the ecological destruction in ways that charts and infographics simply couldn't. And it was an enormously important and a speaking tour. And I would encourage, comrades in Britain to ensure that, to bring people to speak about life. It really wasn't long ago. It's such a recent colonial endeavor, and the extent of kind of destroying traces of life that endured for thousands of years unbroken. It can't be allowed to stand. So I think so that would be really I think my learning from the kind of work we've done with very, very little resources in South Africa. That being said, the JNF has been investing in kind of civic and environmental education initiatives in areas of South Africa that are marked by huge material kind of impoverishment, which is also a function of it's human made. It's a function of our own settler colonial apartheid. I want to say past, but it's accumulations, including in the present. And so, it's very challenging to build a kind of a broad public consensus. And hopefully they're not doing that work in Britain. Here it's part of their, I think the JNF kind of develop, and this is part of what one has to study and know about the adversary is, what are they doing to undermine solidarity and awareness raising beyond, the empirical facts across these various contexts across the world. And of course, lastly, it's not an accident that it's particularly successful organization in places in the world that are themselves settler colonies, former settler colonies, North America, Canada, Australia, and of course, the former empire of Britain. So I'll leave it there. Lots of work to do. I know that comrades in South Africa would be very, very excited and to engage with comrades in Britain around reflecting on campaigns here, finding ways to converge and share resources. And I would really welcome and be absolutely honored to make contact to people who, if you contact me after this. So thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah.
The honour would be in two directions. Friends, the Palestine Return Centre has brought you 4 excellent speakers tonight, each one informative in different ways, and altogether, I hope it's really given you a crash course in the crimes of the racist JNF. But if you want to get somebody paying attention, if you want to carry over in just a quick soundbite that there's something very, very sinister and wicked about the JNF, the two patrons in Britain are Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Anything Tony Blair patronises or patronises is obviously not for human good. He remains a patron even when Cameron resigned as a patron. Look, the JNF controls 94% of the land surface of Israel, of 48. And campaigning on the issue of the JNF for the last 20 years, I find that when you tell people that on that 94%, which they control, Palestinians may not live, may not buy houses, sometimes may not sleep overnight, winning the argument with ordinary people about the criminality of the JNF is extremely simple. Contrary to the idea that it's a difficult issue, I always found it the easiest issue in the Palestine question to persuade people on the street and talking to them very briefly. So please join us in trying to carry that message. Annie mentioned it's coming up to Christmas. I'm going to buy a few trees. Well, I won't buy them. I'll pay for them. They'll be Palestinian trees. Look, you can use a printing press to print filth or to print wonderful literature. You can plant trees for settler colonial purposes and disoccupation, or you can print them for resistance, or you can plant them for resistance. The Plant a Tree is planting trees for resistance. We are working with farmers on the ground who are facing settler harassment. The settlers are greatly encouraged by Ben Gvir and Smotrich. They're already saying Smotrich will sort you guys out. It's a pity you're still here. Ben Gurion should have got rid in 48, but don't worry, Smotrich will make sure that we get rid of you now. It's a dangerous time, and supporting Palestinian resistance is a duty upon all of us. I was really delighted to be reminded that Heidi had done a lot of research into Libya, and I hope any Irish companies are listening. We've got Annie O'Gara, who's a deracinated or transplanted Irish person to England. But Libya is also under a part of the De Valera forest. The JNF has been known to sell the same trees twice, so I'm not quite sure of the actual the relationship between the two. But the De Valera forest, the JNF De Valera forest, had a commemoration recently, officiated with senior diplomats and with Irish soldiers in uniform present who came down from the border with Lebanon in full uniform to say that the Irish people were behind the De Valera forest. And it's, of course, a crime scene like every other JNF forest. So I hope the message gets over to Ireland and we might be able to piggyback and use some of the brilliant research that I'm sure Heidi will make available. Look, friends, in Scotland, we have been harrying and harassing the JNF, publishing, arguing, getting letters, but we never allowed them to have a single fundraiser unchallenged. And since 2014, they do not do it anymore. They have fundraisers, unfortunately, but it's always reported after the event. They never publicize it in advance. They used to have huge events at the Hilton with Bill Clinton and Hollywood A-listers participating. But because of Palestinian resistance and also because of our focus on the JNF, that no longer happens. I'm very proud of that. So friends, great to have these speakers. There's one, join the Palestine Return Centre tomorrow night. They've got an intriguing further event in their week of events. It's Palestinian Exodus, turning Latin America red. I don't know if red means revolutionary or it's a football colour or whatever, but it's concerning the very important Palestinian diaspora in Brazil and Chile and elsewhere. Many lessons to be learned, and I hope they are informed about the Memoria Forest and the JNF's role in covering up the sins of the Argentine junta. So friends, stopthejnf.org. If you can't find that on the internet, then ask your grandchildren. We hope you'll get in touch. We hope you'll help us. We need you. We want you to help. There's a lot of work to be done. If you're a graphic designer, look, if you've got any skill, and like some of us, no particular skill, get in touch anyway, because we need you to get the message over to more and more people. Khulud wants to go back to her village. Her grandmother didn't make it, but died before she was able to. But we have a moral duty from living inside the heart of the beast. Britain started this horrible crisis and still sustains it. When they were mowing down industrial numbers of people in the Gaza, the Great March of Return, Britain was still selling sniper rifle parts to the Israeli army. So it's long and deep and disgusting complicity. We need to counter that with deep and sincere and very effective and creative solidarity. A big thanks to our 4 speakers tonight. Each one I found riveting, and a bigger thanks to the people who joined us tonight. Let's go forward. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. This is Mick Napier on behalf of the PRC Palestine Return Centre saying thank you and good night.